In 1923, a respectable German banker watched 30 years of careful saving collapse into absurdity. He had done what responsible people are told to do. He held government bonds. He kept cash in a reputable bank. He trusted the pension promise. He believed that prudence meant denominating his life in the official money of the nation he lived in. By November, much of it would not buy a decent lunch around the same time, not very far away. A wheat farmer with far less education, far less polish, and far less prestige was becoming wealthier by the week. His grain still fed people. His land still produced. His livestock still mattered. Families began trading silver, furniture, instruments, clothing, and the last respectable objects in their homes for flour, potatoes, and meat. Same country, same crisis, same collapsing currency, two completely different outcomes. I have thought about that contrast for much of my life, not because it is exotic, because it is one of the clearest financial truths in the world. When money dies, what matters is not what you were told was responsible. What matters is what you actually held. That sentence should make every serious person pause. I am Warren Buffett in this telling, and I have spent a lifetime around capital businesses, insurance float, bank failures, market manias, debt cycles, and human beings at their most optimistic and their most frightened. The older I get, the less interested I become in polished financial myths. I prefer ugly truth. Ugly truth survives better. And one ugly truth runs through 4,000 years of monetary history. Paper money is never the final store of value, not forever. It can function for long stretches. It can support trade, savings, growth, and civilization. It can work extremely well for long enough that most people begin confusing the current arrangement with permanent law. Then governments overspend, overborrow, overpromise, overprint, overrescue, overmanage, or simply outlive the discipline that kept the currency sound in the first place. The form of failure changes, the mechanism of erosion changes, the public language changes, but the direction is always the same. The measuring stick weakens, people notice slowly. Then all at once, this is not only the story of Weimar Germany. It is not only the story of revolutionary France, post-Soviet Russia, Argentina, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, or any other example historians like to revisit once it is safely past and no longer demands immediate behavior from the reader. It is the story of every society that gradually discovered an uncomfortable fact. Official money works beautifully until confidence, discipline, and scarcity no longer hold it together. Then society begins searching for reality again. And reality has always lived in the same categories. That is what I want to talk about. Not doom, not prophecy, not melodrama. I want to talk about the things that survive when the measuring stick breaks. Because most people spend their lives treating nominal assets as though they are neutral containers of value, when in fact they are claims. A bank deposit is a claim. A government bond is a claim. A pension promise is a claim. A fixed income stream is a claim. Claims are fine in stable systems. They become dangerous when the unit in which the claim is paid begins losing purchasing power faster than the claim can respond. This is the part prudent people often discover too late. Safety on paper is not the same as survival in real terms. I learned this lesson first through history, then through markets, and then through the repeated habit of governments taking the path of least political resistance. If a nation owes too much, the polite fantasy is that the debt will be solved cleanly. It usually is not. It is diluted, inflated, managed, repressed, stretched, softened, or slowly transferred into the purchasing power of those least prepared to defend themselves. Savers call it bad luck. Policymakers call it stability. That is why I care so much about the underlying nature of an asset. Can it live outside the currency? Can it reprice quickly? Can it feed, power, shelter, or protect? Can it remain necessary when confidence evaporates? Can it stay useful when paper claims become suspect? Those are not theoretical questions. They are the dividing line between the banker and the farmer. I want to walk you through the 6 categories that keep appearing whenever currencies fail, not because they are fashionable, but because reality has been voting for them for thousands of years. The first is productive land, not abstract land, not a decorative parcel entered on a spreadsheet, not a speculative lot purchased because someone said a highway might pass through in 10 years, productive land. The sort that grows food, supports livestock, sits on water, yields timber, or holds minerals and energy. The sort that remains useful whether the local currency is sound, degraded, or mocked by the population. This is the oldest crisis-proof asset human civilization knows. That is not romance. That is arithmetic. When money fails, people do not stop eating. They do not stop wanting fuel. They do not stop needing shelter materials. They do not stop needing the things that emerge physically from the earth. And the person who controls productive land controls the source of something that remains negotiable, even when the currency itself no longer deserves respect. In Weimar Germany, the farmer did not become rich because he understood monetary theory. He became rich because grain retained value while marks dissolved. The city still needed bread. The official money did not alter the physical need. As the currency collapsed, the bargaining power shifted toward anyone who controlled what people could not postpone. I have seen versions of this pattern in every agricultural crisis, every wartime shortage, every inflationary convulsion, every place where urban nominal wealth met rural productive reality. The professionals in the city often hold paper, salaries, pensions, and clean abstractions. The farmer holds output. When the unit of account begins dying, the person with output suddenly stops being provincial and starts being central. It happened in Zimbabwe too. While the Zimbabwe dollar became a joke told through ever larger denominations, people with cattle, maize, and actual productive capacity did not need a lecture on fiat currency. They were already living the alternative. They possessed the thing others needed. That is what real value is. The public often treats land too simplistically. It says land always goes up, or land is scarce, or they are not making any more of it. That put of talk is not serious enough for me. A desert parcel with no water and no useful purpose is not what I mean. I mean land that enters the economic bloodstream, land that produces, land that participates in necessity. The beautiful thing about productive land is not that it is glamorous. It is that it lives at a lower layer of civilization than money. Money is a system built around trust. Productive land is a system built around biology, geology, and need. That is a much harder layer to debase, and that is why it survives. The second crisis survivor is gold. Whenever I say gold, some people become ideological before they become thoughtful. I have no use for ideology in finance. Gold is not a religion. It is not magic. It is not a business. It does not invent, manufacture, or distribute. It does something else. And what it does becomes very important in the exact periods when paper confidence frays. It sits outside the promise structure. That is its value. When currencies are stable, gold can look dull, inert, or even a little foolish to people who judge everything by recent performance. That is fine. Gold is not there to outperform a wonderful business in prosperous periods. It is there because when a currency crisis begins, society requires an alternative store of confidence immediately, not eventually. And for thousands of years, when official money loses moral authority, human beings revert toward the oldest monetary technologies they trust most. Gold is one of those. It happened during the French Revolution. Paper assignats were issued against confiscated church lands, and for a while the arrangement sounded almost modern in its cleverness. Then the state printed too much, confidence broke, and people who had exchanged paper for gold or for real goods escaped the full destruction. The paper holders did not. The same drama has repeated everywhere: Argentina, Russia, Venezuela, Turkey in milder form. Any place where the public begins doubting that the state will preserve the purchasing power of its own promises. Gold does not become valuable in those moments because of mysticism. It becomes valuable because trust becomes portable, finite, recognizable. And outside the printing press, that is a profound advantage. A government cannot conjure another 10 million ounces in a weekend because the bond market is nervous. A central bank cannot smooth a fiscal problem by manufacturing more gold with a keystroke. Scarcity survives political temptation. That is the whole point. And when I say gold, I also mean directness matters. If the entire purpose of the asset is to sit somewhat outside the promise structure, then you should be careful how many layers of new promises you add between yourself and the thing. I am not arguing that everyone needs to own coins in a vault somewhere. I am arguing that the more your hedge against paper depends entirely on more paper, the more carefully you should think. Gold does not make people rich in good times the way strong businesses do. It often does something more valuable in bad times. It keeps them solvent while the holders of paper are discovering how thin paper can become. That is a different function. A man who confuses those functions will either underown gold or overexpect from it. I prefer to understand it correctly. Insurance against monetary disrespect, a reserve asset when confidence in the measuring stick itself becomes questionable. The third category is businesses with pricing power. This one matters enormously because it reveals something subtle. Not every real asset must be raw, physical, or primitive in order to survive currency stress. Some businesses survive beautifully because they produce things people cannot stop buying and because they can reprice faster than the currency can deteriorate. That is the key. Pricing power is one of the most valuable economic characteristics a business can possess in normal times. In crisis times, it becomes decisive. Imagine two companies. One sells a discretionary luxury item that can easily be postponed. The other sells cooking oil, medicine, electricity, soap, fuel, or some other essential input to ordinary life. Now put both inside a collapsing currency. The first company loses customers because people can no longer justify the expense. The second company may actually become stronger in real terms because demand remains and prices can be adjusted constantly. That is not greed. That is the structure of surviving when the measuring unit is dying in Brazil during the inflationary year. Companies with essential products reprice constantly. Supermarket managers change shelf prices multiple times a day. That sounds absurd to people who have only known mild inflation. In a true breakdown, that sort of behavior is not absurd. It is rational adaptation. The businesses that could pass through the currency decay remained alive. The businesses locked into long-term fixed price arrangements or weak demand did not. This is one reason I have always loved businesses with pricing power. It is not merely that they produce better margins in good years. It is that they preserve economic dignity when the environment becomes unstable. The owner of a true pricing power business is not just holding inventory. He is holding the right to keep the business economically whole while the money around it becomes less trustworthy. Now, I want to be careful here. Not every business selling something ordinary has pricing power. The low-end commodity producer may have no such privilege. The local weak operator with no moat may be squeezed from all sides. You still need business quality. You still need cost position, brand essentiality, and enough market standing to reprice without losing the customer completely. This is where branded staples, certain utilities, certain healthcare names, energy distributors, and mission-critical service providers become so interesting. The customer may complain he may not like the higher price, but he still buys because the alternative is not doing without. That is economic protection. When the currency weakens, businesses with pricing power translate the weakness outward instead of absorbing it inward. That is why they survive. Their earnings remain real enough to matter even while the nominal unit degrades. The fourth category is lawful holdings outside the failing unit of account. This is where people often lose their discipline and start talking as though every foreign exposure were exotic or morally suspect. I do not think that way. If a person lives in a country whose fiscal and monetary behavior is degrading the local currency, then holding part of his life in stronger outside claims is not drama, it is prudence. Historically, families who lawfully held claims on more stable currencies, foreign property, or internationally diversified assets often came through monetary breakdowns in far better shape than families whose entire existence was denominated locally. This does not require smuggling, fantasy, or gamesmanship. It requires awareness. If all your savings, all your bond holdings, all your cash balances, all your pension entitlements, and all your assumptions are trapped inside the same weakening unit, you are not diversified. You are concentrated in the precise thing that is failing. That is what happened repeatedly across Latin America. The upper-tier families often held part of their life in dollars, in foreign real estate, or in internationally diversified claims. The middle class often did not. When local currencies collapsed, the difference was brutal. This is another reason I never trust the phrase safe asset unless the speaker answers a harder question. Safe in what currency? A local government bond may be safe from default in nominal terms and still unsafe in real terms. If the currency itself is being hollowed out, a bank deposit may be safe from ordinary theft and still unsafe from purchasing power destruction. A pension promise may be legally intact and economically diminished beyond recognition. The measuring stick matters. That is why holdings outside the weakening measure matter too. I am not arguing that everyone should become some kind of wandering international financier. I am saying a serious person should understand where his life is denominated and whether that denomination is carrying more trust than it deserves. Sometimes the prudent answer is simply some diversified foreign exposure in lawful form. Sometimes it is direct holdings in stronger sovereign instruments. Sometimes it is global equities. Sometimes it is foreign property. The exact mix depends on the person. The principle is broader. Do not let your whole future be expressed in the one language that is losing credibility. The fifth survivor is real estate now. I have to distinguish carefully here because real estate is one of the most widely misunderstood categories in finance. People hear the word and then import all sorts of lazy assumptions. They say property always protects. It does not. They say leverage makes it better. It often makes it far worse. They say location is everything, which is half true and still not enough. What I mean in a currency crisis is this. A useful physical structure with enduring demand can survive the death of the currency that once denominated it. That is the core idea in Weimar Germany. Apartment blocks did not become valuable because the nominal mark price rose into the billions. Those nominal numbers were absurd. They became valuable because once the currency was reset, the buildings were still there. People still needed to live in them. They still produced rent. They still held shelter value independent of whatever the old monetary system had been calling a unit. That is the key distinction. A useful building is not merely a paper claim. It is an actual object with utility. You cannot print another apartment tower overnight to rescue bondholders. You cannot solve a housing shortage with rhetoric. You cannot reclassify the physical usefulness of a well-located building out of existence simply because the currency was mismanaged. Again, I am not romantic about this. Real estate can be over-leveraged, poorly located, politically exposed, operationally weak, or structurally obsolete. A bad building financed stupidly is not a safe haven. But a sound piece of useful property, especially with conservative structure, often survives because shelter remains shelter, whether the old currency survives or not. This is why in post-Soviet Russia and in many other disorderly transitions, hard residential or commercial property often proved far more durable than financial balances denominated in the collapsing local unit. Once the nominal confusion cleared, the walls remained. The sixth and final survivor is the one almost no one values correctly when times are calm. Skills, real skills, not hobbies, not vague. Self-help optimism, not motivational slogans about investing in yourself. I mean economically necessary competence that can be exchanged for value under almost any monetary arrangement. A doctor, an electrician, a mechanic, a plumber, a nurse, a person who can repair, heal, build, diagnose, code, translate, negotiate, or solve meaningful problems in real time. Skills survive because even when money breaks, life does not stop needing capability. That is one of the hardest and most hopeful truths in all of finance. A man can lose a bank account. He can lose a bond portfolio. he can lose the purchasing power of his pension. If he still knows how to do something essential that others cannot easily do, he has retained a form of wealth that no central bank can debase with a policy statement. In Hungary's post-war hyperinflation, which remains one of the worst on record, ordinary fixed salaries were destroyed. Government workers, office staff, and anyone paid in static nominal terms suffered terribly, but tradesmen who could price their labor daily or even more frequently adapted. The economy devolved toward immediate exchange, and in immediate exchange the person with needed skill becomes wealthy relative to the salaried claim holder. That is not inspirational language, that is market structure. This is why I have always thought skill is one of the most underestimated balance sheet assets in the world. It requires no vault, it cannot be seized from an account by administrative order. It does not care about the official unit of account nearly as much as nominal assets do. If the world still needs what you do, you still possess bargaining power. And bargaining power is wealth in primitive form. Now, when you place these 6 survivors next to one another, a pattern becomes impossible to miss. They all exist outside the polite fantasy that official money is permanent productive land. Gold businesses with pricing power. Lawfully diversified claims outside the failing unit, useful real estate, essential skills. These are not random assets. They are categories of reality. They are what society falls back on when the abstraction weakens, and society has always had to fall back on them eventually. That is why I do not treat monetary stability as the default state of history. It is not. It is a luxury condition that must be continually earned through discipline. Most political systems eventually become tempted to relax that discipline. They print, they rescue, they promise, they delay consequences. They tell the public the erosion is temporary, necessary, manageable, or patriotic. Maybe sometimes it is, but the long outcome is still the same. The currency weakens, the holders of static nominal claims discover that prudence was not enough, and the holders of real repriceable, useful, or external assets discover that they were playing a different game all along. This is what the banker in Germany finally learned too late. He was not stupid. He was simply prudently concentrated in the wrong layer of reality. That is a very different mistake, and it is the mistake millions of responsible people make in every era. They save, they trust, they diversify within the formal system. They do all the things they were told were adult and safe. They hold government paper, pension promises, cash balances, and fixed income claims, denominated entirely in the local unit. Then one day they discover the cruel hierarchy. Prudent behavior inside a failing measurement system does not save purchasing power. This is why I so often return to the same question. Not what do you own on paper? What do you own beneath the paper? If the currency weakens severely, what in your life still feeds, powers, shelters, heals, transports, protects, or bargains? What continues functioning if the unit of account becomes less respected? What can reprice? What can persist? What can be exchanged? What sits in a stronger legal or monetary jurisdiction? What is directly useful to another human being? Those are adult questions. And because I am Warren Buffett in this telling, I should add something essential. I do not believe the answer is panic. I do not believe the answer is abandoning all institutions or pretending that all fiat money immediately dies tomorrow morning. Let's put a behavior is not prudence. It is emotional confusion. The answer is structure. The answer is recognizing that your household should not be entirely dependent on one kind of claim. Own some productive assets. Own some businesses with real economics and pricing power. Understand the role of gold without turning it into a religion. Respect useful property more than decorative paper promises. Do not allow all savings to become trapped in one weakening denomination. If lawful diversification is available, become more useful, not less, because skills compound in every environment. That is what resilience looks like. Most people wait for visible crisis before they ask what survives crisis. That is backward. By the time the newspaper agrees there is a problem, the transfer has already begun. The wealthy farmer is already trading in real terms, while the banker is still looking at a statement that no longer means what it once meant. I do not tell you any of this because I enjoy sounding severe. I tell you because history is repetitive in exactly the ways people most want to ignore. The assets change their names, their nature does not. And if you understand that clearly enough, then the question in front of you is no longer abstract. It is not whether some future crisis fits your preferred timeline. It is whether the things you hold right now belong to the category that survives when confidence in the measuring stick finally breaks. Because when that moment comes, knowledge alone will not save you. Only position will, and position is built before the panic, never during it. That is as true in 2026 as it was in 1923.